that classic Hollywood image, the dark suit, the earpiece, maybe looking a bit intense.
It's stereotype.
In Canada, that whole picture of executive protection, it's changing fast and almost quietly into something way more complex.
Absolutely. It's not just about standing guard anymore.
Right.
The shift we're really seeing, it's fundamental. It's moving from, let's say, a purely reactive physical thing, someone just there as a deterrent.
Or a shield.
Or a shield, exactly, toward this really sophisticated model. It's built on proactive planning, on intelligent risk management, and just a much wider understanding of the kinds of threats people face now.
And that's really the heart of this deep dive, isn't it? We've gathered, a bunch of source material articles, research that really unpacks this whole transformation. Our mission here is to cut through it all, understand what's driving this changing landscape in Canada, see what makes the Canadian approach, unique, and basically figure out what it all means. Whether you're someone facing these risks or maybe providing these services.
And it's important to say this isn't just a concern for, politicians or celebrities anymore. That's maybe the old view.
Right.
Now, for leaders across business, law, even people in, say, public-facing academic roles or nonprofits, executive protection is becoming less of a luxury.
More of a necessity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Driven by these really complex, diverse threats they're running into.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's get a feel for the environment. How big is this world of executive protection in Canada? What shapes it?
Well, executive protection itself, it's a pretty specialized corner of Canada's wider private security sector.
Okay.
And that sector is already huge. We're talking over $9 billion a year.
Wow.
And the sources we looked at suggest it's set for significant growth.
Yeah.
Could top $12.5 billion USD in the next few years. So EP is a slice, but it's within this really large and growing pie.
Interesting. So big picture, it's definitely significant. But how much does regulation play into this? I get the sense it's not one single national standard.
No, that's a really critical point. Unlike some other places, security licensing in Canada, it's provincial. You absolutely need a security guard license. That's the base. But the actual required hours for basic training, they vary. Province to province.
Like what kind of variation are we talking?
You're looking at around 40 hours, give or take, for that foundational license in places like Ontario, Alberta, BC. Quebec's a bit higher, 54 hours, I think.
Okay.
But that's just the entry ticket, just the baseline.
And this, I think, brings us to what feels like the most defining thing, maybe even the most innovative part of EP in Canada, compared to, say, the U.S. or the U.K.
Yeah. You mean the unarmed constraint.
Exactly. That seems huge.
It is probably the single biggest factor that forces innovation in the Canadian market. In almost all situations, private executive protection agents simply cannot carry firearms.
Right.
And that legal reality, it just means firms can't fall back on lethal force as a primary tool.
So if you take that option off the table, what does that force the industry to really focus on?
It completely changes the game, the strategy. It forces this intense focus on prevention, on incredibly detailed planning, on developing razor-sharp situational awareness, on using technology for monitoring, for communication, and really crucially, on gathering and analyzing intelligence.
So it's all about avoiding the confrontation.
Entirely. Avoiding it in the first place, rather than being equipped to, end it with a gun. It's about staying steps ahead, always.
That's a fundamental pivot. Wow. It sounds like the job description itself has just ballooned way beyond just, being a physical presence.
Oh, absolutely.
What else are clients expecting now?
The expectation has broadened massively. It's just not enough to provide personnel anymore. A really comprehensive EP service, today, it has to integrate things like meticulous travel risk planning.
Okay.
Sophisticated digital threat monitoring, keeping tabs on online mentions, doxing risks, that sort of thing.
Right, the online stuff.
Yeah, and robust real-time communication protocols. These pieces aren't add-ons now. They're becoming standard integrated parts of one protective model.
Okay. That gives us a picture of how the service is shaped, especially by that unarmed piece. But why? Why is demand growing so much? Is it just more money around, or is something else driving it?
The sources we looked at suggest it's way more than just, an increase in wealthy individuals. The demand is really expanding because the nature of the threats people face is changing.
How so?
Well, we're seeing things like digital harassment, doxing, becoming mainstream issues, not just fringe online stuff anymore.
Yeah, seems like it's everywhere.
Exactly. Unpredictable protest movements are more common. And the sources definitely point to increased polarization, especially since the pandemic, adding this layer of tension, unpredictability for anyone in the public eye, really.
That's a really important distinction. It sounds like for a lot of clients, the worry isn't necessarily some big dramatic kidnapping plot,
Right.
but maybe something more pervasive, less predictable.
Precisely. For many executives, entrepreneurs, high-profile professionals, the risk isn't one single dramatic event. It's often this prolonged kind of ambient risk.
Ambient risk. Like what?
Think about threats coming from maybe a disgruntled former employee, or a complex family situation, or maybe activist groups targeting a specific industry or company.
Okay.
These threats, they're often less about direct physical violence, although that's always a possibility, and more about sustained harassment, intimidation, reputational damage, disruption across lots of different areas, including digital spaces.
And how does that kind of threat landscape, ambient, diverse, how does that shape the kind of protection people actually need?
Well, it demands models that are incredibly adaptable. Protection has to be nimble. It needs to be scalable up or down depending on the situation.
Right.
And above all, it needs to be highly tailored to the individual client's specific risk profile, their lifestyle, not just some generic security package pulled off the shelf.
This seems to lead perfectly into the new operational models that are popping up. It sounds like we're moving away from just hiring a bodyguard for a week or something.
Yeah, we're seeing a really significant shift towards what the sources are calling embedded security partnerships.
Embedded partnerships.
Yeah, it feels less like a transactional sort of ad hoc service and more like having this highly specialized integrated capability. It almost acts like an extension of public safety institutions, but it's tailored specifically to an individual.
Okay.
The core focus is really on continuous prevention and readiness, deeply integrated into the client's daily life or maybe their organization structure.
I can imagine some people hearing embedded, though, and thinking, hang on, is that getting into, like, private policing territory? How do the sources handle that concern?
Yeah, it's a totally valid question, and the sources are pretty clear on the nuance there. While this embedded model is definitely sophisticated, deeply integrated, it's explicitly not about replacing public safety or acting with the authority of law enforcement. It's really about providing continuity, maintaining discretion, and implementing preventative measures in a way that, frankly, public services just aren't designed to do for individuals. It's about managing personal risk, but within the existing legal framework.
Okay, that distinction's important. And another operational trend mentioned was the move towards subscription models. How does that work?
Yeah, this is definitely gaining traction, especially for clients who face that ongoing ambient risk we talked about, rather than just needing protection for specific events.
Right, not just a one-off.
Exactly. So instead of hiring protection today or per event, clients subscribe to continuous coverage. And that model, it inherently emphasizes anticipation, proactive monitoring, over just reacting when something happens. It also offers flexibility, right? It allows the level of service to adapt as the client's needs change or maybe the perceived risks change over time.
Let's try and make this more concrete. The sources pointed to Paramount Defense Group as an example, right? A firm using these newer approaches. What does their model actually look like?
Yeah, Paramount's a good illustration of these trends in action. Their operations are apparently quite notable in some high-risk residential areas of Toronto, places like Rosedale, Forest Hill, the Bridle Path.
Okay.
Their whole approach seems rooted in this disciplined mindset. It kind of combines elements from public safety backgrounds, but with the precision you need in the private sector.
And their focus fits with that shift towards intelligence we were talking about.
Absolutely. They describe their model as intelligence-driven and tiered. It's not just about assigning a person to stand somewhere.
Right.
It involves this continuous analysis of potential threats that are relevant to that specific client's profile, their environment.
And how does their agent training differ from that provincial baseline we discussed earlier, the 40 or 50 hours?
Oh, it goes significantly beyond that. Their agents aren't just trained in physical protection. They apparently get extensive training in recognizing digital threats.
Ah, okay.
Conducting detailed site security assessments, planning complex exit contingencies, how to safely get a client out of a potentially bad situation.
Right, the what-ifs.
Exactly. The sources mentioned they actively map, understand, and monitor clients for a whole range of vulnerabilities, physical, digital, even lifestyle or operational factors that could create risk.
So that subscription model you mentioned, does that feed into this intelligence-driven approach?
Yeah, it's synergistic, really. The continuity you get from a subscription allows the agents and the firm to build up this deep familiarity with the client's routines, their family, their staff, their physical environment.
That makes sense.
And that close understanding, it's invaluable for effective prevention, for anticipating issues. And importantly, it all operates within a very clear, ethical, licensed, and transparent framework. That's emphasized.
And interestingly, the sources noted they aren't necessarily like shouting about this intelligence and digital side from the rooftops.
No, it seems much more integrated, almost seamlessly. The sophisticated intelligence gathering, the digital monitoring, it seems to be embedded quietly into their standard operating procedure.
So the client benefits without maybe even realizing the full extent.
Potentially, yeah. A client might benefit from a threat being neutralized before they even knew it existed, without the service being overtly marketed as, digital surveillance. It's about discrete, layered protection.
This leads perfectly into the whole training and professionalization piece. We've touched on the provincial license being just the beginning. What specific skills are absolutely essential now for EP agents?
The sources are really emphatic on this point. The mandatory provincial training, those 40 or 54 hours, yeah, it's necessary for the license, but it is nowhere near sufficient for the demands, the complexities of modern executive protection.
Just the entry fee.
Exactly. It's merely the foundational requirement, the absolute baseline.
So beyond that baseline, what's crucial? What skills do they really need?
Okay, top of the list, life-saving medical skills. First aid, CPR, AED training, absolutely critical.
Makes sense. If something happened.
Right, if something happens to the client, the EP agent might be the first, maybe the only person right there who can provide critical medical aid. So that's non-negotiable.
Okay, well.
Defensive and evasive driving. This is another one that's absolutely essential. Road travel is consistently identified as one of the highest risk environments for a client.
Right, moving target.
Exactly. So agents need to be expert drivers. Not just competent, but expert. Capable of performing complex maneuvers under pressure.
Defensive driving. Yeah, that makes intuitive sense, though maybe you don't think of it first. What about defensive tactics? Is it all about fighting?
Well, the training here is highly specialized for close protection. It tends to focus heavily on non-lethal methods, on close quarters protection, safe evacuation.
Getting the client out.
Precisely. And scenario-based training, like MBUS and DBUS, practicing getting the client safely into and out of vehicles, especially in potentially hostile situations. The emphasis is really on control, de-escalation, and protection, not traditional combat skills.
And awareness.
Oh, critically important. Intensive ongoing training in situational awareness, surveillance detection, and threat assessment. Constantly learning to recognize those subtle indicators, the pre-attack signs that something isn't right.
Given that Canada doesn't have, like, a dedicated national EP certification, how do agents actually get to this high level of professionalism? Where do they get this training?
Yeah, that's a good point. They often have to look internationally. Many will pursue global certifications offered in places like the US or the UK, which have more formalized close protection qualifications.
Okay.
They also undertake intensive private courses offered by specialized training providers, and they might gain credentials in related security management fields, like those from ASIS or meeting CGSP standards.
So it's a mix of things.
It is. But the consensus in the sources is really clear. The provincial license is just step one. Continuous specialized skills upgrading is absolutely non-negotiable in this field. Oh, and one final point, the sources really stress. Training is vital, obviously, but there's just no substitute for real-life experience.
Right, the street smarts.
Exactly. Yeah. That ability to assess complex unfolding situations, adapt in real time, that's something that's primarily honed through actually doing the job, through that on-the-job learning and experience.
So putting the Canadian industry in a global context, then, how does it stack up? How's it viewed?
The sources seem to portray the Canadian EP industry as definitely a maturing sector and one that's earning a strong reputation internationally.
Oh, interesting. For what?
Particularly for its discretion, its composure under pressure, and a really high level of professionalism. And this even without the kind of formalized regulatory structure you might find in the UK or just the sheer scale of the US market. And the ethos here, agents often come from law enforcement or military backgrounds, but they're specifically retrained for private service. And that ethos really emphasizes restraint, a deep respect for working alongside public security systems, not replacing them.
Right.
And a strong commitment to non-escalation. which of course aligns perfectly with that unarmed operational environment we talked about earlier.
So it sounds like they compensate for the lack of, say, a single national certification by building in other strengths. Is that fair?
Precisely. That's a good way to put it. Canadian firms adapt global standards, global tactics,
Yeah.
but they tailor them to the local context. They compensate for maybe less formalized specific EP qualifications by integrating these other capabilities like community risk mapping, advanced digital monitoring, sophisticated travel analytics right into their core service. It's a really integrated approach that suits the unique Canadian landscape,
Yeah.
shaped so much by that unarmed constraint.
So let's try and tie all this together then. What's the next chapter look like? Where is executive protection in Canada heading?
The clear direction that the sources point to is towards deeply embedded risk management. The field seems to be becoming less about just reacting to immediate threats.
Putting out fires.
Yeah, exactly. And much more about proactively anticipating them, analyzing them, forecasting them even. The firms that are likely going to lead are those that build this kind of predictive capacity right into their operations.
And that Paramount model we discussed earlier, it really feels like a kind of blueprint for this future, doesn't it?
It really does seem like it. Without needing a lot of overt flash, their model combines that essential physical protection with continuous digital awareness and that ongoing threat analysis.
Right.
It's delivered as this serving that provides continuity, operates with discretion, and functions truly as a strategic extension of the client's environment, almost silently safeguarding them across multiple dimensions.
And I guess as the threats people face continue to become more nuanced, maybe less visible, more integrated across their digital and physical lives, the value of this quieter, more integrated, more intelligent model is only going to increase.
Absolutely. It's certainly not designed to replace public security, nor could it. But it is becoming an increasingly vital complementary layer of protection for those individuals navigating today's pretty complex, unpredictable world.
So there you have it, a real transformation happening. From that traditional bodyguarding idea to this intelligent, integrated risk management, it makes you think, doesn't it, about how this evolution in private security reflects the broader changes in the nature of risk we all kind of face today.
Yeah, absolutely. Consider how that need to anticipate threats in the digital realm is becoming just as critical as dealing with the physical realm, and how that applies not just to executives, but maybe in different ways to all of us,
Definitely something to chew on. The future of executive protection, it seems it isn't just about confronting the visible threats anymore, but really about getting ahead of the invisible ones.